Times and things are changing down in Washington for the Commanders, and David Harrison, host of the Locked On Commanders podcast, is going to help us sort through all that as we continue our look at the New York Giants 2023 opponents. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Chaina. Happy to have you with us as we continue our look at the New York Giants 2023 opponents, and who better to bring them the information that we need than the Locked On hosts, my fellow Locked On hosts, who are just absolutely amazing people, who are knowledgeable. Just so happy to be a part of the Locked On family. And speaking of family, I have with us the Washington Commanders Locked On Commanders host, David Harrison, who's just an absolute sweetheart. David, thank you so much for taking time to join me.
Oh, always appreciate you having me on. And Patricia, I look forward to talking to you. Look forward to seeing you every time the Commanders are headed to New York. So I look forward to that as well this season.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, David and I get to see each other a couple times during the year for a crossover show. And then, of course, when the teams actually do meet up. So very excited to have David on. David, let's jump right in. I think we've got to start with a couple big stories for the Commanders. And the first one, kind of a macro thing, if you will, and that is the pending sale of the team. Has that frozen things, as far as how they're going to shape the roster? I mean, you've got a lot of roster decisions to be made, contract extension decisions to be made. Some guys' futures are up in the air. I mean, what can you tell us about the pending sale and the effect it's had on the Commanders?
Yeah, early on in the offseason, they were really given kind of the freedom to do, a lot of what they needed to do, whether it was re-signing guys like Daron Payne or, coming in and getting a few free agents here and there, like Andrew Wiley from the Kansas City Chiefs. But the perception really is that the reason that was done is because, and I don't know how many football fans really know this, but a lot of times the bonuses that are paid out to players are kind of paid out over a period of time, but they're usually like 12 to 15 months after the contracts are actually signed. It's not always a situation, and nothing is, blanket coverage, so there may be a guy here or there who gets their money quicker. But generally speaking, when you hear about a player signing their contract and they get a bonus, that bonus doesn't just boom, hit their bank account, by the time the reports are coming through. So there is a little bit of delayed gratification there. And when you look at like Daron Payne's contract, the assumption, and, I'm not in Daron's pockets or anything, so I don't know for 100%, but the assumption is that the new owners will inherit that new contract, they'll inherit that bonus, and they will go pay that bonus. But that's a bonus that they should be very, very happy to pay as new owners of the Washington Commanders. But moving kind of as the ball has gotten rolling a little bit more, now the Commanders kind of in a freeze mode. And honestly, some of that could be true. Some of that could just be them leveraging this situation to their benefit, because they got guys like safety Cameron Curl who wants a new contract. But when you look back again at what they do with Daron Payne, he wanted a new contract last year. They both went about it in very similar methods of trying to get the new deal. And they forced Daron to play on his expiring deal, giving him a new contract once he proved that he could be, as effective as he was last season. So the truth could be that they just are using this as an excuse to not give Cam Curl a new deal and make him come into the regular season on an expiring contract. But that is basically the vibe that we're getting, or the news that we're getting. And there's other moves like Travell Wharton. Right now, if you look at the Commanders website, they don't actually have an offensive line coach. They have an assistant offensive line coach and nothing else. That's because they haven't been able to move Wharton up to that full-time offensive line coach position, because, again, they need to wait for the ownership to do new contracts, new salaries, and new duty titles.
What about Ron Rivera and the coaching staff's future? I mean, obviously, sometimes when you have new ownership coming in, they just want to tear everything down, start from scratch. How has Ron and his staff been, kind of holding up through all this?
It's really been business as usual. Obviously Eric Bienemy, the new assistant head coach and offensive coordinator, he's a new wrinkle in this entire thing. So, he himself just being here is different. But really, when you look at Ron Rivera and coaches that have been here, like Randy Jordan, the running backs coach, or, a number of other guys, they're coaching the same way that they have before. They talk to us the same way that they have before. There's no sense that, there's more pressure, that there's an added, kind of influence here. So, I'll give them kudos. Like it does, it does seem like they really are just kind of trying to approach this the way they approach every single season, every single practice, and all of those things. But of course, on the outside looking in, it's certainly something that we're discussing, and then trying to gauge what we think might be the standard that they have to reach in order for a guy like Josh Harris to keep them on board. When in reality, I mean, we haven't even spoken to Josh Harris on an official, on the record matter. So, we're really just kind of playing with our own, perceptions of ownership. But like you said, I mean, it's fully possible that anything outside of a Super Bowl win essentially leads to a replacement, because Josh Harris may be an owner who wants to come in and just clean house from the beginning.
You mentioned Eric Bienemy, the new offensive coordinator. What's changing under him as far as schemes, as far as personnel deployment, or what can you tell us about the new offense that he's putting in place?
Yeah, there's a lot changing under EB, and honestly, part of it obviously is also the offense, but part of it is also the title of assistant head coach. Like when that was given to him, a lot of people I think kind of pushed it aside and said, well, of course they give him that title, they want to create a head coach opportunity for him, and that's kind of the narrative. We heard all the comments from Andy Reid towards the end of last season, and then the Super Bowl win. The first question, hey Andy, what led to the Super Bowl win? First words out of his mouth is Eric Bienemy. They're a pretty transparent campaign to try to get him hired as a head coach. But the reality of it is that role has come with very real duties. He's setting the practice schedule. He's setting the meeting times. He's dictating kind of the pace of what these guys are doing on their day-to-day basis. And I think that's very important. And it is a little bit different than what they saw last year. But to a player, we've spoken to Sam Howell about, Jahan Dotson, a lot of these other guys, they actually really like the energy. They like the kind of different pace that Eric Bienemy is bringing to it. And then you get to the offense and the additions of what they're doing. And really it's a lot of it's very interesting, because a lot of times what you see in some coaches is you see very complex and almost convoluted schemes that have like 42 different formations, and if I wiggle my right ear it means this, and if I tap my left toe it means that. But what Eric Bienemy really is doing, at least in the beginning here, is he's installing X amount of formations, and they're running X amount of plays out of those same formations. And then each package has a code word. So maybe the code word is Patricia Traina. And when EB says Patricia Traina, these guys know they're on the field, and then they get the call within that shell of plays. And I think it's really kind of accelerating not only the entire offense's learning curve, but also quarterback Sam Howell's. And I think that's a big part of this whole thing, is understanding that, EB comes from Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes, I'm pretty sure you could throw pretty much any formation, any call you want to him in any moment, and he's probably going to make it happen. But then you come in with Sam Howell, who's obviously not as mobile, not as experienced. So the ability to simplify it, but also simplify it in a way that we're seeing in OTAs and in minicamp, that you'll see similar formations. And whereas the last couple of years, honestly, we've been able to kind of look at a formation and say, okay, this is probably the type of concept you're about to see, and be pretty spot on. But with this offense, you see a certain type of formation, and you might say, okay, well, I think here we're probably going to see this route combination, but you see something completely different. And it's creative while it's simplistic. And I think that's a really hard balance to strike sometimes.
You mentioned Sam Howell, who looks like he's going to be the quarterback going into this year. Were you surprised, number one, that the Commanders didn't do another, make another move for another quarterback, a more established quarterback? Do you think Howell can be the guy? I mean, how do you see that shaping out?
So first thing, I wasn't surprised to see them roll forward with Sam Howell and bring in a veteran that could be competitive if they needed him to, but not be a veteran that comes in, just boom, automatically draws the type of attention that says they have to start this guy. So Jacoby Brissett is kind of that perfect fit, because I think a lot of people look at him and say Jacoby could be a starting quarterback in the NFL, but doesn't have to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. Whereas you look at a guy like maybe, I don't know, Nick Foles, when he was leaving the Philadelphia Eagles after that Super Bowl and all those things, it was kind of like he's going to go somewhere to get another opportunity. Jacoby is kind of on that career backup, but you could live with him being your starter track. So that was a good, smart pick, and he's proven to be a very good mentor and a very good teammate to Sam Howell during this early part of the offseason program. But Sam Howell himself is someone that Ron Rivera, this staff, was very, very high on. We have unconfirmed assumptions, I'll call them, maybe that you can call them reports, but whispers on the wind that say that the Commanders really had a second-round grade on him. But because Carson Wentz was in the building, because they had, there's obviously the ego stories that have been talked about. You can't pull the trigger on a second-round quarterback. and expect Carson Wentz to thrive. The Philadelphia Eagles proved that you can't do that and expect for Carson Wentz to thrive. So they passed on him, and then they passed in the third, they passed in the fourth. But when it came down to the fifth round and he was still there, they had to make the call to Carson and say, look, dude, you're our guy this year, but we can't pass on this guy again. You have to understand this. So they went ahead and they took him. And for what it's worth, I don't think Sam Howell's presence had anything to do with anything that happened with Carson Wentz last year. That's a whole other ball of yarn we can untangle some other time if you want to. But at the end of the day, I don't believe, and it's hard for me to really pinpoint it, but I don't think this conveyor belt of veteran quarterbacks that we've seen come onto this roster since Ron Rivera arrived has been because of Ron Rivera. I think that this is a situation where ownership, maybe, some senior leadership in the organization have kind of said, look, we want to accelerate the growth process. And typically when you're talking about accelerating the growth process, you want experience. You don't want youth and inexperience. A young quarterback typically means you're building something. Veterans, you like to think they can come in and plug and play. It hasn't worked this year. We've heard Ron Rivera talk a lot more freely about roster building and team building. And the fact that he's starting with this young quarterback, paying a lot of money out to the defense, I think that, the vibe I get from that is that Ron kind of wanted to do this all along. And if you remember his most successful seasons in Carolina, he did it with a young Cam Newton. It wasn't he brought in a veteran for the Carolina Panthers. That's how they made it to the Super Bowl. No, he brought in a young QB, built around him. Eventually, Cam obviously got paid, but they started the nucleus with a young quarterback.
How does, excuse me, how does Eric Bienemy's system complement what Sam Howell does best?
It lets him do a little bit of everything. And I think that's really kind of the best way to unlock Sam Howell's potential, because he's very intelligent. But, the thing about very intelligent people sometimes is they see a problem ahead or a hurdle ahead, and they come up with, boom, 3 or 4 different options, right? But what Eric Bienemy is doing is kind of giving Sam Howell boxes to put these options in and say, okay, in this situation with this look against, this defense, this is obviously to come in the future, but against this defense, so to speak, here's where we need you to be. We don't need Sam Howell to be the hero every week. We just need Sam Howell to be the right quarterback. So maybe it's the New York Giants, and maybe Saquon Barkley hasn't, settled his contract terms. And so the Giants don't have, the quite as electric running game as they would like to have. So maybe we look at this game and say, we don't need to blow them out of the water. We just need to control the clock and put the pressure on Daniel Jones to throw the ball by bleeding the clock. So Sam, in this situation, you might have these 4 solutions in your head, but we need you to take this one or this one, because that's what's smarter for our game plan. And Sam has the ability to be intelligent enough to see those options, but also has the discipline enough to take the coaching and do what they're asking of him. And I think that's really kind of the best way that this duo is starting to blend together early on.
Hey, Giant fans, take your first swing at betting on Major League Baseball at FanDuel and get 10 times the amount of your first bet in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 to spend on betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All of that on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports partner of Major League Baseball. All right, now looking at the offensive line, if you're like every other team, it seems like the Giants are facing, there are questions on your offensive line. I think at left guard, if I'm not mistaken. What can you tell us about how that unit's coming along? And are you concerned about that unit?
You can't not be concerned about it, right? I think that you have to be a little bit concerned. There's one starter returning, and Sam Cosmi, and let's be clear, like last year's offensive line wasn't that great anyway. So to a certain extent, like maybe it's addition by subtraction that, only one returning starter is coming back. Now, Sam Cosmi was the starting right tackle. I don't know if he started right tackle for both the Giants games, because he did bounce back and forth from right guard to right tackle at times, but he was the quote unquote starting right tackle last year. This year, he's the right guard. So he's still on the line, just not, penciled in to the original position. The center now is Nick Gates, which you guys are very familiar with. You and I talked extensively about Nick when he arrived to Washington, and everything you said about him has proven to be true so far. He's an absolutely trip to talk to. I absolutely enjoy that. Andrew Wiley comes over from Kansas City. He's got Super Bowl pedigree. He knows Eric Bienemy. So the idea is he's going to be a veteran who helps this team kind of learn what EB is about a little bit faster. So, there's potential there. There's hope there. The question, like you said, is left guard. Sadiq Charles, as of now, he's a 2020 draft pick, so his career hasn't exactly been very long. But as of now, he's a career backup, spot starter when needed. Hasn't really had the opportunity to prove that he can be a 17-week starter in the NFL, but he hasn't had the opportunity to prove that he can't be either. The team is voicing confidence about him. And be honest, they have enough cap space and flexibility that if they wanted to go sign a veteran left guard to come in and replace him, they could have, you know what I mean? And there were certainly offensive guard prospects in the NFL draft that they could have gone after if they didn't have faith in Sadiq. So I think that the faith is not just lip service. I think it's real. And then last year's 7th-round pick, Chris Paul, is penciled in as the backup just his second year after being a 7th-round pick. They're really they've been very boisterous about how confident they are in him, a lot of times unprovoked, because, as you know, we don't see a lot of 7th-round practice tape and practice reps during the season from those types of guys. So for them to kind of be as boisterous as they have been while not being provoked to be really speaks to the confidence they have in a guy like Chris Paul.
Turning to the skill position players, you guys are pretty set, I think, at wide receiver. I think you're okay with your running back situation. But at tight end, you didn't really get a whole lot of production out of that unit last year. Eric Bienemy, of course, coming from Kansas City, where Travis Kelce was the man, a central part of that offensive attack. What do you anticipate for the commander tight ends? I mean, do you think that they can obviously nobody can be a Travis Kelce, but do you anticipate maybe seeing more 12 and 22 personnel, or how do you figure the tight ends will play into the whole equation?
Yeah, I think 12 personnel is probably going to be your main package that you see out of the Washington Commanders this year. I would love to see some 22. I wanted to see 22 last year. I wanted to see 22 the year before. Didn't really ever get it. I've already kind of said with Eric Bienemy in town, with these running backs on the roster, and with a guy like Curtis Samuel, who is listed as a receiver but has backfield experience and ability, if we don't see 22 at some point in time, I might just go crazy. But bottom line is, I think you're gonna live with the 12 personnel package. Logan Thomas is your top tight end. I think the real battle here is for the second tight end spot. John Bates is, a guy from the 2021 draft class that hasn't really been great, but I think he's kind of maybe been the best part of that group. And he's the second tight end right now. He's still the second tight end right now. Coming into the NFL, we knew he was more of a blocking tight end than a receiving tight end. I think he's proven to be a better receiver than we expected, but he's not that kind of level of receiver that I think to say can be a secured second tight end in this scheme. But Cole Turner is a guy that came in out of Nevada last year as a 5th-round pick and really showed a lot of stuff in the rookie camp, mandatory mini camps, early part of training camp, was really catching fire. And then he suffered a hamstring injury. He ended up coming back in regular season from that hamstring injury, suffers a concussion, and just basically couldn't get fully healthy the entire rest of the season. Really derailed a lot of the momentum that he had built. Well, coming into this year's OTAs, this year's mandatory minicamp, he's recaught a lot of that momentum. And there's been multiple coaches, and Logan Thomas himself has said that this type of offense that Eric Bienemy is bringing to Washington is really tailor-made for a guy like Cole Turner. So I don't think Cole Turner takes over number one tight end duties this year. I think Logan Thomas is pretty firm there. But if John Bates, I think this is pretty much his last opportunity to show that he can be that type of receiving tight end that this team wants. If he can't do it by the end of training camp, I think you come in and Cole Turner is your number 2 tight end.
All right, let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. I think that's where most of Washington's draft picks came from. A pair of, let's see, you got Emmanuel Forbes, I think, at a cornerback. Jartavius Martin, I think, was also added to the equation. I mean, what do you think of this defense? Is this a top 5 defense? I mean, it was pretty good last year, but what did all these additions bring to this defense?
Yeah, I think last year they were 13th, and you look at it, Chase Young was out for most of the season, really never, I would argue never really fully got up to speed by the time the end of the season even came. So he comes back and, a lot of eyes are going to be on him and how much he can improve his game if he can. Montez Sweat needs to get better at finishing. But then you mentioned those rookies, Emmanuel Forbes, Quan Martin. So Jartavius is his legal first name, but he goes by Quan Martin. And he's shown a lot of versatility, skill, flashed a lot of those talents and football IQ. And I think that's really the best way to describe this defense is they're extremely intelligent. And it's given a lot of problems to Sam Howell and to Jacoby Brissett in the OTA mandatory minicamp periods, but it's also forced them to become even smarter, even faster. So when they are getting wins or when they are getting some deep passes or big plays, like they can celebrate it a little bit better because they're really having to earn it. I mean, I don't think I've seen this many checkdowns in an OTA minicamp session ever in my entire time covering any type of sports, whether it was Washington or Tampa Bay. So it's been very impressive. The communication is really big, is really there. And the thing about Jack Del Rio's match zone defense is it relies a lot on everybody on the field seeing the same thing, because if two people see a different thing, they could end up in the same place or they can end up in completely opposite positions that they need to be. And that's how you get blown coverage. That's how you see, Amon-Ra St. Brown and the Detroit Lions wide open in the end zone for a touchdown in red zone. Like, that should never happen. You should never have a guy by himself, but that's how that happens. And I'll tell you, Emmanuel Forbes so far and Quan Martin, as they fold in, like, we haven't seen a single blown coverage from this first team group, and we haven't seen a single just bad read by this first team group. And Emmanuel Forbes, who set the collegiate record for pick sixes in her career, has already had multiple interceptions in OTAs and camp or mini camp that honestly you look at it and you say, that's the right read. That's the right throw. Emmanuel Forbes was just psychic and essentially broke on it so quickly and so well that there was really nothing the quarterback could have done there. There's actually one play I can share with you that was kind of a throwaway play. And, Patricia, you've seen this before during practice. The quarterback scrambles and, you're not going to tackle him. So eventually everybody kind of just starts jogging and the play is over and, okay, we reset and we run the next play. Well, Sam Howell decided on one play, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and fling the ball downfield anyway, even though everybody's pretty much done playing. And I'll tell you, Emmanuel Forbes covered about 2/3 of the football field in that split second time where Sam Howell decided to throw the ball and end up coming down with an interception. Now, again, we don't chart it as an interception because the play is essentially over, but just that ability to cover as much ground as he did, stay competitive as he was, and come down with the ball. It was amazing to see when it happened, and that is the reason that they drafted a guy like Emmanuel Forbes, to get those takeaways.
David, what can you tell us about the Chase Young situation? I think there was a report earlier that the Commanders might be looking to move him, that, they're kind of, I don't want to say giving up on him, but, just ready to move on. What's going on there, and what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, nobody's given up on Chase Young. I think really what it boils down to is Chase Young, it's his time. You know what I mean? It's in his hands. It's on his cleats, however you want to say it. It's up to Chase Young to show the Washington Commanders that he is what they thought he was when they drafted him and what they think he can be moving forward. Like, the Washington Commanders organization would love nothing more than to have all the evidence in the world to give him a nice fat paycheck next season and once again make him one of the faces of the franchise. Just up to this point, whether it's been injury related or effort related. And, we go back, a lot of people outside of Washington kind of look at the injury and say, oh, well, he was the defensive rookie of the year and all these things, and that injury really messed him up. Well, what people don't realize is that injury came midway, closer to the back half of the season, the front half of the season, and they only had one sack. Like, there's the production hasn't been there for quite some time. And by the time that injury happened, there were already a lot of conversations we were having with Ron Rivera, with Jack Del Rio, where they were talking about certain guys not playing their assignments, freelancing too much, going outside the play call. And, as well as anybody else, if you're a 4-3 traditional 4-3 type defensive end and your job is to set the edge, but you think you have a better matchup inside, so you collapse inside and you give up the edge, and a guy like Saquon Barkley takes that edge from you and breaks off a 15-yard run, what everybody's going to see on NFL Network is Kendall Fuller running him down or Cam Curl chasing him or Jamin Davis chasing him from behind. But the reality of the play breakdown is that defensive end that was supposed to set the edge, you're the reason that play broke out the way that it did. And that's a problem. You know what I mean? So, what we haven't seen yet and what we need to see is whether or not Chase Young is coming in with the attitude of, let me be part of this system instead of let me be the system. And if he comes in to be part of the system, look, he's a very talented guy. The knock on him coming out of Ohio State is he didn't really have a second move. I think that knock has persisted through his injury. Now that he's coming back, I will tell you, when he showed up to OTAs, or not OTAs, when he showed up to minicamp, he does look a lot lighter on his feet than I remember seeing him. He looks very quick, very confident. And in the minicamp sessions, no pads, limited physicality, so take it with a grain of salt. I actually did. I think I saw a couple of second moves. So we'll see if that continues, and if that's the case, then maybe we could see a resurgent Chase Young. So, but nobody has given up on him, and no vibe that I get in talking to other folks around the building. I don't get a vibe from any of them that there's a trade coming. So if it does come, a lot of us will be surprised that it's coming just because of the tempo, just because of the atmosphere around him. But honestly, I wouldn't be 100% surprised. I was talking a lot about the potential of them trading him before the NFL draft, just because up to this point, it just really hasn't panned out.
All right, let's talk a little bit about matchups. I know we're in we're in summer camp or about to start summer camp, 90-man rosters. So the 53 isn't set, but we kind of can figure out who certain guys are going to be on the team and won't, barring injury, of course.
Right.
Where do you think the Commanders best match up against the Giants, and where are you most concerned about their matchup with the Giants?
I mean, Saquon Barkley is the one that scares me the most. I think that's, you're probably gonna get that answer from a lot of people. And, I believe that when it all is said and done, that they're going to figure that out. I don't know if you're the Giants, I don't know how you don't figure out. And I don't know what the latest is on that too. But if you're the Giants, I don't see how you don't figure it out. Full disclosure, I think they completely went backwards on this thing. I think they gave the wrong guy the contract. They gave the wrong guy the franchise tag, but that's neither here nor there. And there's background on that I don't know, that, they're in conversations I wasn't in on. But Saquon Barkley, honestly, is really the guy that scares me the most for this Giants team. And on defense, you certainly have some really good players. Dexter Lawrence is a guy that we've talked about a lot, but even Dexter Lawrence isn't a guy that I think single-handedly you can say if everything else goes right, but Dexter Lawrence is on, if everything goes right for Washington, that is, but Dexter Lawrence wins all day long, you're going to lose this game. I think even if Dexter wins all day, but everything else goes the Commanders' way, I think the Commanders still come away with a win in that game. So those are kind of the two guys that I'm really most worried about. And then when you look at this Commanders offensive line, like you mentioned, a lot of them are new pieces. If I'm the Giants, and obviously by the time they play for the first time, there will be some time to see kind of what's what. But just looking at this Commanders roster today, if I was planning to play the Commanders as the Giants, I would be looking to get Dexter Lawrence matched up with Sadiq Charles as much as I could, just to see if this guy has what it is. Or look, I don't know, maybe if he beat Nick Gates a lot in practice, I mean, they may just have the secret sauce and just say, look, sorry, Nick, we love you, man, but we're about to embarrass you in an NFC East battle. And then, on offense again, Saquon. Honestly, look, I'm not a big Daniel Jones fan. You know this, Patricia. We'll talk about it again in crossovers. I think the greatest thing that Coach Dable did, and I kind of told him this at the Senior Bowl. I wasn't like blunt, because we want to be respectful, but I kind of told him I think the greatest coaching thing that Coach Dable did was actually minimize Daniel Jones's flaws. But I don't think he got rid of the flaws. I think the flaws are still there. It's just a matter of other teams forcing the Giants to get into a position where those flaws have to be exposed, or the potential of them imploding have to be there. And I think the Giants did a really good job of making sure those scenarios rarely came up.
What did Dable say, just out of curiosity, when you said that?
So fortunately, we were in kind of a group setting, and we were all kind of talking about like, oh man, coach had a great season. Oh man, coach this. And I'm trying to remember exactly how I said it, but I think what I said was like, the way that you handled Daniel Jones, I think, was one of the most brilliant things this season. It was along those lines, right? So, which is my way of kind of saying like, DJ's a problem, but you did good stuff with him. You know what I mean? And he kind of took all the compliments in hand and said, yeah, we're really happy where we're going. Yeah, it's coach speak. You know what I mean? None of it was on the record per se anyway, but like it was very coach speak. We got, we had some more interesting words with, who's your defense? I can't remember his name. Your defense
Wink
coordinator.
Martindale.
Yeah. Wink. We had more interesting. We'll talk offline about that.
Yeah. I could just imagine how those conversations went. All right. So when you look at these upcoming matchups, I mean, the Giants mainly have had Washington's number, with a few exceptions here and there. But where do you think Washington can get the upper hand against the Giants moving forward, if they have, obviously the firepower to do so?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, if you're healthy, if this team has their full closet of weapons, it's such a broken record to say here in Washington right now. But if this team has average or better quarterback play, then I think they can win both these matchups. And when you look at last year, I think the tie, right? What I love about the tie is I think the Giants side, the Commander side, media and fans, teams, locker rooms, all across the board, both sides came away from that game saying this side should have won that game. And both sides were right. You know what I mean? But I think that kind of just shows just how relatively close they really are. But at the same time, when you look at the quarterback situation the Washington Commanders were going through, I mean, Taylor Heineke, I love the human being. He's a great dude. I wish him all the best in Atlanta. But he's backing up a guy like Desmond Ridder in the NFL for a reason. Carson Wentz, the rumor is that he's had some approaches, some offers. Take it for what it's worth. I think his days as a starting quarterback are done. I don't think that's an experiment you're going to see any other NFL franchise go through again. So when you take that into an account, if Sam Howell comes out and looks like, even, a mid-tier, if he can come out and be a 15th to 18th ranked starting quarterback in the NFL, which honestly is a fairly high ask for a guy in his situation, a 5th-round pick in his second year. But if we get that kind of quarterback play from the Commanders quarterback position this year, then I think this is a matchup that they can win both the games against. However, that's great. The paper looks good and the defense looks good on paper and all those other things. But you and I know, and Giants fans know, it all comes down to execution. So at the end of the day, I don't care how talented you think your roster is or what the ratings on Madden say. When you get on the field, who executes better, who takes advantages of the opportunities, who doesn't fumble in their own red zone and then in the opponent's red zone, and who doesn't get a pass interference called for them, by the way. At the end of the day, that's going to dictate who wins these games. But I don't think it's something. It's not a situation where you say, the Commanders will handle the Giants. But I don't think it's a situation where if you're on the Giants side, you can say the same thing going the other way, which is what should make these two games this year very entertaining.
He is David Harrison, the host of the Locked On Commanders podcast. Make sure you are checking him out, as well as all of our Locked On NFL hosts. They are just tremendous human beings. They know their stuff. David, I can't thank you enough for coming on with me to discuss the Commanders, and we will see each other and be talking to each other soon enough.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast as we continue to talk to our colleagues here at other teams that are facing the Giants in 2023. So make sure you keep it here all week long. Plenty of stuff coming up. For David Harrison, I am Patricia Traina. Thank you for making us your first listener of the day, or watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. We will see you tomorrow, Giant fans.